Welcome back to today's Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a literal masterclass in technological foresight. We're going to break down exactly how a company, one that used to be known just for making video game graphics, engineered a rise to absolute, unquestioned global dominance. And as a super crucial subplot we'll be exploring along the way, we're going to look at how their manufacturing partner, TSMC, quietly took over the world right alongside them. All right, let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this. Just look at this number, $3.35 trillion. On June 18th, 2024, Nvidia hit this absolutely staggering peak market capitalization. And with that milestone, they didn't just have, a good quarter. They officially crowned themselves as the most valuable company in the entire world. They literally leapfrogged tech giants that had dominated the landscape for decades. To really put that into perspective for you, their market cap is bigger than the entire GDP of many developed nations. It's just wild. So what's the actual engine behind a valuation like that? It's revenue. In the first quarter of their 2024 to 2025 fiscal year, they posted a jaw-dropping year-over-year revenue growth of 234%. That brought their quarterly revenue to over $26 billion, completely shattering market expectations. And at the same time, their earnings per share exploded by roughly 400% compared to the previous year. But here's the really crucial takeaway for us today. This massive financial explosion, it's really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to their overall success. To truly grasp how they got here, we gotta look way below the surface. Section 1. From gaming to supercomputers. Let's move to and see how this builds over time. So back in 1993, Jensen Huang, who remarkably is still the CEO today, founded Nvidia. Now, their original vision was simply that the PC would become a massive consumer device for gaming and multimedia. So in 1999, they launched the GeForce 256. But the real masterstroke, that actually happened a year earlier, in 1998, right there in the middle of our timeline. You see, Nvidia made a massive strategic bet to be entirely fabless. They forged a multi-year partnership with TSMC over in Taiwan, and get this, today a whopping 60% of TSMC's global production is dedicated solely to Nvidia. So while Nvidia was busy designing the brains, TSMC quietly became the world's largest independent semiconductor manufacturer. They are effectively running the physical infrastructure of the modern AI world. It's this beautiful symbiotic relationship that completely reshaped global tech. Then, fast forward a bit to 2006, Nvidia introduced CUDA, which, as we'll see in just a second, became their true impenetrable software moat. Section 2, the secret power of GPUs. Now, for decades, traditional CPUs basically just coasted on the compounding power of Moore's law, which tells us that the complexity of a microcircuit, basically the number of transistors you can fit on a chip, doubles roughly every 18 months. But here's the catch. Training deep learning models requires massive parallel computations that easily choke a traditional CPU. It's just too much all at once. Nvidia realized really early on that the architecture of a GPU, which was originally designed to process thousands of distinct visual threads simultaneously for high-end video games, was actually the exact mathematical environment you need for matrix multiplication in artificial intelligence. So they essentially had the perfect hardware for a massive revolution that almost nobody else saw coming. But, hardware is really only half the battle, right? Here we're comparing the two software frameworks that defined who controls the market. On the right, we have OpenCL. Now, this was initiated by Apple, and it's maintained by a nonprofit consortium. It's totally open source, and it's designed to be portable across chips made by all the big guys, Intel, AMD, Nvidia. But then on the left, we have Nvidia's CUDA, which they rolled out back in 2006. CUDA is completely proprietary to Nvidia hardware. It basically allows developers to write code that speaks directly to the immense raw power of the GPU. And because it's so highly specialized, the performance you get is just vastly superior. By developing CUDA early and building this massive ecosystem around it, Nvidia essentially dug an impenetrable software moat. Developers spent years learning CUDA, major institutions built all their AI models on it, and because CUDA only runs on Nvidia chips, well, they successfully locked the entire development world into their specific hardware. It's a moat so deep that their competitors are honestly still drowning in it. Section 3. Dominating the chip market. And this brilliantly illustrates the transformation we're talking about. Historically speaking, gaming was absolutely Nvidia's lifeblood. But when you look at this 2023 revenue breakdown, the streams have completely flipped. Those massive AI data centers now totally eclipse their original gaming market. Data centers represent the most significant and, frankly, the most rapidly expanding share of their income. Now, don't get me wrong, gaming is still super important, but data centers are the absolute powerhouse driving these trillion-dollar valuations we're seeing today. And when we look at actual market share,
the picture is even more absolute. In the first quarter of 2024, Nvidia commanded a staggering 88% of the global GPU market. I mean, 88%. Their closest competitor, AMD, held just 12%, and they've actually been losing ground from the previous quarter. And Intel? They sit at essentially 0% in this specific high-performance GPU space. So Nvidia isn't just leading the market, they have an undisputed stranglehold on it. They are just visually crushing their traditional competitors across the board.
To put a hard economic metric on this level of dominance, let's look at the Herfindahl-Hirschman Index, or HHI. Basically, this is just a really common measure of market concentration. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, an HHI anywhere above 1,800 indicates a highly concentrated market. Well, based on these sales figures, the GPU market has an HHI of 7888. Yeah, 7888. That is just astronomically high. It officially classifies the sector as highly concentrated, which means it's essentially functioning as a pure monopoly. So you might be wondering, how does a company this massive stay nimble enough to actually maintain a monopoly? It all comes down to their internal architecture. Nvidia uses a hybrid, cross-functional matrix organizational structure under CEO Jensen Huang. And, much like Jensen's famously unchanging black leather jacket, this structure provides a constant, highly reliable framework for incredibly fast adaptation. Instead of getting bogged down in rigid traditional corporate hierarchies, they are constantly forming temporary, cross-functional project teams to tackle very specific tasks. Maybe it's developing a new AI chip or pivoting to enter the autonomous vehicle market. This setup allows for super smooth horizontal collaboration and incredibly fast decision-making. It gives them the exact agility they need to just completely outmaneuver the slower, more traditional tech giants out there.
Section 4. The financial AI boom.
Now, it's important to remember that Nvidia didn't do all of this in a vacuum. There were some really powerful external catalysts that just skyrocketed the global demand for their hardware. For example, back in 2013, the United States launched the BRAIN Initiative, which poured massive amounts of federal funding into research that utilized AI and high-performance computing. Then, right after that, in 2017, the Chinese government enacted their own strategic initiative, which featured immense, sweeping investments entirely dedicated to AI and semiconductor development. So you have these massive multinational governmental funding initiatives acting as this incredibly powerful accelerant. Almost overnight, it made NVIDIA's GPUs literally the most sought-after hardware in global scientific research. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is looking at who is actually profiting from this massive boom. When we break down the ownership of NVIDIA, you'll see that institutional investors heavily back the company. They hold nearly 67% of all outstanding shares. We're talking about financial giants like Vanguard and BlackRock, who alone hold roughly 15% of the entire company. And here's the thing. These massive institutions aren't just day trading here. They are placing huge, long-term bets on NVIDIA acting as the foundational infrastructure of the future AI economy. And hey, of course, the insiders are doing quite well too. CEO Jensen Huang holds over 86 million shares himself, which values his personal stake well into the tens of billions of dollars. Not a bad payday, right? Which brings us to our final slide today, and honestly, the ultimate question. The sources we've been exploring point out that the hypergrowth of the AI sector is eventually, inevitably, going to face some form of stabilization and market consolidation. What you should really take away from this explainer is that NVIDIA achieved this mind-blowing dominance through brilliant foresight, truly ruthless execution, and an unbreakable critical reliance on TSMC. But here is the provocative thought I want to leave you with. As global competitors race frantically to build open-source alternatives to CUDA, and as geopolitical crosshairs focus squarely on Taiwan's semiconductor foundries, is NVIDIA's $3.35 trillion castle built on an impenetrable foundation, or is it sitting on a highly fragile supply chain? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning everything,